Hello again, and welcome to our virtual unit preview for Greek theater. This is the first unit in my 8th grade semester. If this is the first virtual unit preview you have watched, I'm going to encourage you to go back and look at the Acting Basics unit preview. I know it's long, but it has a lot of the foundational information about what these are and how to use them. So I'm going to encourage you to head back that direction before we move on. This is our agenda for this video. It's the same as all the others. So we're going to jump right in and go to our semester overview. So if you've watched any of these before, or you just know because we've talked before, my semesters, I teach each grade for one semester, are themed. So 6th grade works on acting skills, 7th grade works on backstage skills, and 8th grade works on theater history. So since this is history-based, the way these units build is chronologically. I've chosen to go over what are sort of traditionally thought of as the 3 big movements in Western theater. So we start with the Greeks, we move to Shakespeare, and then we move to musicals. At the very end, they do what I call their Genius Project. This is the first year I'm doing it because it's the first year where my 8th graders are scholars I've taught all the way through middle school, where they get to answer the question, why is theater important, in any way that they choose. But we'll get to that more when that's closer to happening in the semester. So today we're going to start looking at Greek theater. So when I was looking at the TEKS specifically, I've talked in earlier videos about how it's a little bananas for me to try to fit all the TEKS for each grade into one semester when the TEKS are really built for classes that go an entire year. And so I try to make sure that they cover each of the TEKS at least once before they leave me in 8th grade. And when I looked at my 6th and 7th grade curriculum, I realized that mostly what I was missing was that 4th category in the TEKS, which is about theater history. And so that is why I decided to spend the rest of their time with me this whole last semester working on that. If you hear weird jangling, it's because my puppies come to say hello. Hi, Pocket. I also want them to be able to use their practical knowledge to explore theater history. So looking at these units, they are not regurgitating information to me about the Greeks or Shakespeare or musical theater. Their goal is to take the things they've learned about what those styles mean and create their own piece of theater. It's either writing or a performance, but they are using the practical knowledge they've gained as playwrights or as actors, etc., to inform their projects for theater history. And again, this is chronological. This is the first of our 3 units that happened in history, so that's where we're starting. So overall, looking at the intro, we're going to start with the statement of inquiry, which says that inventing new ways to tell stories changes the stories we choose to tell. It's the idea here is that the Greeks, since they invented theater the way we know it, scripts and actors and that sort of thing, the way that changed these myths when they're being told orally versus how they're being told in the theater, and the way you have to change a story based on the medium or the format you're telling it in. Again, if you've watched one of these, you know at the end of the unit, my scholars are going to write me about whether they think this is true or false, or if they think we can tell the same story in multiple different contexts and it doesn't change it. These are the contexts and the concepts that I use to build my statement of inquiry. If you are new to statement of inquiry building, feel free to shoot me an email and I can go into that in more depth for you. So for the assessment, they are going to write a play that's in the Greek style. So it's going to have a lot of qualities that Greek plays had, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the assessment breakdown. But they're going to use this time also to talk about a contemporary issue of their choice. We'll go over all of that more later. There are lots of great opportunities for interdisciplinary connections, and they're not just limited to if somebody else is talking about ancient Greece. Feel free to look at that on the unit plan. If you have questions, reach out. So we're going to spend a few slides going through how the summative assessment aligns to all of the expectations. So we're going to start with the TEKS and how the TEKS show up in the summative assessment. So the first one is that they can use vocabulary and terminology. So that is their ability to take the things that I have in their expectations on their rubric and apply them correctly, because they have to know what those things are in order to do that. Exploring and evaluating the structure and form of dramatic literature. Anytime you read or write or create a performance, you can use this TEKS. So since they are writing a script, they are exploring the structure and form of dramatic literature. And the next one is one of those ones that's really specific to being theater history. So it says that they're able to demonstrate theater as a reflection of life in a particular time, place, and culture. So we're not quite going to do it through performance, so I'm fudging this one a little bit, but they are going to look at the way that Greek theater affected Greek life, and see if that still applies when they transition it through to today. They also are going to explore theater heritage and cultural influences in dramatic text, because we're going to read sections, probably not a full play. They are long, but read sections of extant plays from this time period. This one, I like this TEK a lot. So since Greek theater is the beginning of Western theater, which is also a place where like movies and television came out of, we can look at the way that Greek theater affected the things that they are familiar with today, as well as theater in general. So that's, I love this TEK. I love using this TEK. And that they're able to develop the knowledge of the terminology and processes of evaluation. So essentially what this means is they need to be able to give each other feedback. And since they are writing scripts, I am not requiring my scholars to perform them. Instead, on the day that they're due, they're going to exchange them with lots of different other scholars, and they're going to be able to give each other feedback on their scripts. So we're not going to get up and do performances. You'll notice my other favorite TEK about audience expectations is not here because we're not performing, but we are going to work on giving each other feedback. Now, if we're looking at how the summative assessment aligns to the objectives, all these criteria are for year 3, which in IB language means 8th grade. So A1, that they can demonstrate the knowledge of the role of the art form in original or displaced context. They're actually doing both in this unit because they have to understand how Greek theater functioned in ancient Greek society, and then they're going to take some of those qualities and move them forward in time for a play for today. They have to outline a clear and feasible artistic intention. They are going to do planning in class, and there's going to be a good chunk of their grade for their summative assessment. That is, what was your plan, and did your play actually execute that plan? And then create an artistic response inspired by the world around them. Even in this little blurb you see here, it says that they are going to write about a contemporary issue of their choice. And so all of the expectations based around that are going to fall under this criterion here. So, how it aligns to the statement of inquiry. Essentially, by writing a contemporary story in the style of a period play, they are going to see firsthand if you can do that successfully. If you can tell a story that can affect us today and is important in a style that's not from our time period. And so as they go through and they evaluate each other on that day that their scripts are due, they're going to be gathering information. And then on that day that I have at the end of every unit where we sit down and we reflect and we talk about it, we can talk, whole group, about were these plays successful? Why not? What is the issue? Can you take a Greek style, the format of a Greek play, and make it applicable to life today? So they're going to be firsthand gathering information about that. So, grade level. This unit is specifically aimed for 8th grade with the criterions and the TEKS and the major assumption of prior knowledge. I do not go over how to write a play, like the format it needs to look like on the paper. I only go over the changes from the sort of contemporary style to what a Greek play needs to look like. So I assume that the scholars have a lot of that information already. If you need to adjust this, here are some of the ideas that I had. You could shorten or lengthen the requirements for script length or the number of elements of Greek style that are required. We'll look at that again when we get to the assessment. If there are some scholars who, if you're looking to use this with scholars who are younger or need some more support, providing a theme or a few possible themes for scholars to choose from can really help with this process, because for a lot of them, the most challenging part is going to be coming up with something today that they want to write about that is complex enough to support what they're being asked to do format-wise. Now we're going to move into the daily breakdown and look at the days that I have laid out in this unit. Again, this is completely adjustable. Take this as a guide, but adjust it and change it and move things around as works for you and your scholars. So first day, I like to start not even with theater, but with the idea of storytelling. We get a fun activity. The kids get to move around and talk to each other, which is always great the first day of like real lesson, not just going over class procedures. It's a great way to build investment because they're doing something that is interesting. They're doing things that are about them. They're telling stories about themselves. So this is a great place to start, not just content-wise, but also just like investment and morale-wise. So on the second day, we talk about Greek life. I have at least one of these days in each of the history units where we're not necessarily learning any of the specific things that they're going to have to recreate in their project, but it's important for them to be grounded in what's going on in the time period. So this is a very ambitious day. This used to be multiple days, and I had a lot more information about each of these aspects of Greek life, about their government, about their religion, and about the city Dionysia. And I've tried to pare it down to the things I think are genuinely directly needed for them to understand the parts about Greek theater that I'm asking them to understand. If you look at all the things they're supposed to understand here and you go, what? No. Why? How? That's fine. Split it up. Make it multiple days. That's absolutely doable. So moving on to day 3, they're going to get different just little chunks of multiple scripts from Greek theater, and then they're going to have to go through and talk about the commonalities that they find, and then use that as a jumping off point to talk about aspects of Greek theater that I want to be sure they understand. When you are looking at specifically for me at Greek theater, but if you are ever wanting to talk about playwrights or theater traditions that are not based in English, be sure you're looking at different translations as well as different plays. There's a lot of terrible translations of things out there, not just of the Greeks, but like there's lots of really bad Moliere. So be sure to do some shopping around before you settle for anything. This is a day when we talk about what a big question is. This is the first day that we're talking about something that is an actual bullet point. They have to put this on their final project. Some of the things we talk about in the class before are like that, and some of them aren't. But they have to write a big question. So this is the day where I would be giving out their rubrics. We'd be talking about what the project is overall, and I would assign them to come up with a big question, which is a theme that they're going to base the play around that they think applies to life today. And since big questions are a lot like theme, I just like to phrase it as a question. I find it more dynamic. That's a really great built-in connection with ELA. That's a great time to reach out to your ELA teacher and talk about how you can support each other when you're both teaching very similar things over the course of the year. Day 5. So if you look at the bottom, of this middle column, which are the key points. You'll notice it's cut off. There's a whole lot more of it. I didn't feel like I needed to have a whole separate slide just to show you the rest of the plot of Oedipus. If you don't know the plot of Oedipus, go look it up. But I do this play with the kids. We don't read the whole play, but we go through and reread scenes of it and then sort of summarize the things that happen in between so that we can get through most of it. If you feel nervous about the content of that play with your kids, I totally understand. Antigone is also super great. I love the shock value, and I have the support of my admin that as long as we don't go into too much detail and we don't spend a lot of time about it, then that's a totally fine thing because it's a classic. But check with your admin, check with yourself. If you don't want to deal with talking to your kids about anything that sounds a little bit like Oedipus accidentally slept with his mom, I would go with Antigone. But that's also a fantastic play to do this with. So for this class, instead of having them do inquiry-based where they're exploring it and then we're talking about it, I'm going to give them some stuff up front, and then they're going to read the scenes in Oedipus and sort of find the things we've talked about in the actual text. These are all things that they have to replicate in their final project. So this day is also really directly tied to the summative assessment. Okay, so these are work days. I have a whole day of planning and then a whole day of script writing. If your scholars need more structure, you can break that time up as much as you want. If you want to make this even more days because you think they need that kind of support, that's absolutely fine. I usually break the time down in class. I do it less for 8th grade. So I'll usually give them chunks of time and then structured break time. Where they've worked for 15 or 20 minutes, and so then we're going to take a 5 or 10 minute break and we're going to play a game where they're going to be able to talk, or we're going to watch a fun video. I love showing the kids OK Go videos because they're amazing. If you can see on day 6, in that last column, which is the assessment, that's where I put my exit tickets. And again, this is a place where I write it exactly how I'm going to write it for the scholars, so I can copy and paste it. They are talking about what the big question they're asking in their play is, which means their big question that they had to do as life work is due on this day. While they're planning, I do conferencing with them about their question, about where they're going with their script, that kind of stuff, so that we can make sure we're on the same page. So their scripts have to be done before they walk in the door on day 8 here, and then they get to trade scripts with lots of different people and give critiques. If you have a lot of scholars, on performance days, I recommend you splitting it up into 2 days. I don't think that's necessary here. Just know that each scholar is not going to read every other scholar's script. If that's really important to you, then maybe you do need to split it up into 2 days or find a way to facilitate that in the time. But I'm okay if they don't read every single other human script in that room. And then this, again, is the wrap-up day. We're going to talk about the scripts that they read, what they liked, what they didn't like, do they think it's successful, so that then they can write me about whether the statement of inquiry is true or false. Okay. We're going to talk about the assessment. So this is almost all of the GRASPS framework. That last S is the rubric. Again, if you're unfamiliar with this, send me an email. I'm happy to spend more time and break it down with you. And this is exactly the way I would give it to the scholars, so I don't have to waste time typing it here and then retyping it later. You'll see that it includes the due date for when their big question proposals are due. It has length requirements. We don't spend a lot of time talking about all 5 parts of the story arc because they've done that in ELA before, but we do go over it. And I'm a big stickler for that because they should know what that is and they should know how to do it. This particular project, you might notice if you've watched all my other videos, bless you if you have, is that I usually incentivize the final project. They get life's work passes, or they get homework passes, or something like that. I don't have one built in here. if you'd like to, since they're going to be giving each other feedback, there's more than enough opportunity for it. You can be this committee that I'm talking about who's going to choose plays for the new Festival of Dionysus. You can have the scholars work on that. It is whatever floats your boat. I need less of that in 8th grade, but if you find that you need it, or if I find that I need it, there's definitely opportunity built in there. If you've watched my videos, you also know I like a lot of bullet points. I like to be really explicit. Vague expectations are nobody's friend. I want them to know exactly what they have to do, so that we save hurt feelings and stress at the end. This is the first of the many reminders they will get in my class that the planning worksheets are part of their final grade. The planning worksheets are part of their final grade. I will tell them that when they get the planning worksheets. I will tell them that when they are working on writing their script from their planning worksheets. And I will tell them that again on the day that everything is due. I will also probably send it home in an email to their parents and be like, hi, we worked on this today and it's due for their final project. So if your child loses things, you might want to help them find the thing. Covering all my bases up front it gives me more confidence and it gives me more documentation if parents get upset because they lose all the points for that, because they can't claim that I didn't tell the kids and I didn't tell them. So if we're looking here at the rubric again, you know these are all 3 separate rubrics when I hand them to kids so that they can see these expectations, which are my task-specific clarifications, as well as the IB rubric expectations, because we can't change their words. So they're being evaluated in 3 different places here. The things that fall into knowing and understanding are really about incorporating the Greek elements and doing that correctly. Thinking creatively is about the planning and that their script is turned in and like essentially is what they planned, and also that I can read it because I had to put that somewhere. And then there's just one thing in Criterion D, but it in and of itself is almost 25% of their grade, which is that their big question makes sense. It relates to daily life. It's well explained, all of that stuff in the proposal. I like the point system. I know that I've shown these to some people and their heads kind of explode, but a lot of that work being done up front means that I know how to grade them. One of the problems I had the first year that I was teaching is I'd make these rubrics and yay, but I wouldn't really know what grade because my grade books have to be out of 100%. And so how to take like the 6 that they got on the IB scale and turn that into a grade, and this eliminates that problem for me. And it means that I have these rubrics automatically generate the out of 100% point system as well as their IB grade for each of the criterion I'm using, without me having to like do a lot of weird mental math or having to think too hard about it. I've done all that thinking up front, so when I'm grading it goes a lot faster. Differentiation. If you've watched my other videos, you know I was taught when you're thinking about differentiation, especially for the summative, you need to think about how you're differentiating for your English language learners, your kids who are at the lower end, and the kids who are at the higher end. So in this particular case, I'm totally cool if kids want to write this script in their native language as long as they translate it for me. It doesn't have to be the most amazing, perfect. I'm not going to grade grammar in the translation, which is why it says loose translation. But I do need something because I'm really terrible at learning another language, so I feel their pain. So scholars who need extra support, and I talked about this earlier when you're thinking about maybe leveling this down if you want, adjusting the length requirement and giving them some choices about the big question and about even maybe the situation that they're going to write about based on that big question, so that they can, some of that work that's coming out of complete thin air, they have some sort of framework for. And then for scholars who need an extra challenge and are at the high end of the spectrum, in ancient Greek theater, playwrights didn't turn in 1 play for the competition, they turned in 4. There were 3 tragedies and a comedy, a satyr play. And so they wouldn't have to write me 3 other scripts, but an outline of what the other scripts would be so that it forms a cohesive unit. So sort of giving me a paragraph, that might be a little long, but couple sentence overview of what each of those other scripts would be, and then some kind of description about how they all join together. And that's it. Greek theater. It is fast and dirty, but at this point in their theater education, really all they need is an overview and exposure to these ideas. If you have any questions, there is my email address. We have now gotten through all the virtual unit previews for all of my Unit 1s. I will come back and see you again when some of my Unit 2s have been uploaded, but until then, have an excellent day, and I will see you later.